Sounds good.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's UX UI General Body Meeting. Today, we will be featuring our FTC alum and past leader, Zachary Miller. And it's going to be an exciting time. He will be talking more about the field as well as his experience in it as well.
All right, and Zach is, as Joy mentioned, an FTC alum. He graduated in fall 2022. He has experience in UX and UI, and of course, how that relates to the technical communication field. And so he's joining us today as a treasured FTC member and a treasured community member and current professional who can talk about UX and UI. And yes, can't wait to hear everything from Zach about just the awesome experiences you've had and just the insights you've learned from the field. Yeah, it's gonna be a great time. So we can pass it right on to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Joy and John. So glad to be here. Thank you for the invite. So yeah, today we're talking a little bit about UX, how my experiences relate to UX, and just some of my research experience as an undergraduate at UCF. But just to start, I want to say I graduated as an anthropology major and fell into basically some human-computer interaction research, which led me to learn about UX and technical communication. And I just realized how interdisciplinary the fields of technical communication, user experience really are, and just how so many different disciplines can contribute to making them great, making them work better. So I just want to start off with a little game that's going to kind of warm us up to thinking about why user experience matters, why researching user experience matters. So I just want to start, do you know how to use your product? Let's see if we can find out. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to be going over today. Our game, name that intended use, what is user experience, when to do user experience research, what can we do to better understand our users, and then a couple of different case studies from my research as a student at UCF. So I'm going to be showing you some images, and I'd just like you to try to guess what the intended use was. So when these products came out, they originally had a different use, and basically we're going to see how observing consumers, observing people using products can lead to us better defining the product. So I just want to start with Play-Doh. I don't know, could I get some guesses maybe in the chat, or you can speak up maybe what you think Play-Doh might have been originally used for? Keep my eyes on the chat here.
Wall cleaner?
Let's see, you're good. Boom, wall cleaner. So as you can see, that was absolutely correct. So Play-Doh started as something that you cleaned your walls with. This was a product, I think it says for wallpapered and flat painted walls. So I think these days I use can't remember what it's called, but it's like a little sponge thing with Mr. Clean on it. Mr. Clean Magic Eraser. That's what I use for the walls. But yeah, originally Play-Doh started as wall cleaner. And just basically somebody saw that there was an idea here, people are actually playing with this wall cleaner. Let's make it, let's rebrand it, let's play with it. So go on to another one here. How about bubble wrap? Let's see if can we get another first guess answer? All right. 5, 4.
For protecting people.
Protecting people? Great guess. So actually, it was created using 2 clear shower curtains. It was an idea of trying to make like a different style wallpaper. Um, and I think what I read about it was basically something that would appeal to the beatnik generation.
In the 70s.
Yeah, so it's crazy. And then they realized how protective it was. You know, somebody popped the first bubble, and you know, it just caught from there. How about the Frisbee? Any guesses?
That's tough. I
5.
can only think about it as like something for a game.
Yeah, I know, right? It's ingrained in our minds, like what a Frisbee is. But let's see here. Pie tin. So
Oh,
Frisbee pot, there was a company that was started by somebody with the last name Frisbee. And they made pies. And basically, when we look at how people use the product in context, they finish their pie and now they're playing games with it. They're throwing it. They're yelling, you know, watch out, it's a Frisbee pie tin. So that's another great example. Okay, and the last one here. Okay. Any guesses?
I'm so curious.
This one's supposed to be funny, so get ready to laugh. Nokia, woo!
Very clever.
I knew it.
But yeah, so the whole point is we're not our users. I mean, sometimes we may be, you know, we might use the same platform that our users use, but when it comes to designing products, to evaluating user experience, you really come with all your biases when you're designing, when you're choosing what the user does. And as we saw in the cases previously with just products in general, not necessarily digital products, but we could see how people can use products in a very unintended way, which can therefore further improve the product and reanimate the product to be what the users want it to be. So just getting into what is user experience, you know, we hear UX, UI, but basically how I think of it, user experience is an interdisciplinary field that encompasses all of the interactions that somebody might have with a product, service, or technology. So as you can see, my little diagram I found here, we have a lot of different sort of influences that go into user experience. You know, I come from anthropology, hence my experience in user research. But we also got technical communication over here. We got a little content strategy. Ooh. But there's a lot of different things here, a lot of different crossover. And the whole point really is that UX doesn't really equal UI. Now, interfaces can be a crucial aspect when it comes to digital technology these days, but UI is often sort of positioned as a product that delivers a service. So, you know, Instagram, the app interface is my product. My service is the service it offers me. It allows me to connect with friends, share content. So in this diagram here, you see a lot going into it. We have UI in the middle here, but we have all sort of other factors that go into UX. But when it comes to conducting research that informs the user experience or gives us a better idea of what the user experience actually is, in the product design lifecycle, a huge part in the sort of generative research that we might do is empathizing with users. So this might not necessarily involve a product yet. It might be some preliminary research that you do that informs how you design the product, by specifically defining the problem that your product solves. So, asking the 5 whys, just getting to the root cause of what a problem is. And, once we leave with understanding the user's problem, we go on to creating some sort of product, creating some prototype based on our research, which has never been used by a user before. But when research comes into play again is during that testing phase. Like we mentioned at the start of the call, we want to test what we have. We want to see what it looks like when somebody is going through our app, our web page to complete a goal, to complete a task. And that, this can even translate to, sort of like written interfaces. So you want to see how well your instruction manual is. Well, watch somebody try to put together a Lego set based on your instructions. And that's how you really define what you need to improve, how you can continue the cycle and make your product better. So there's a lot of different methods available to us when we want to use research as a way to better understand our user experience. This is a really great diagram here, the landscape of user research methods. We have a scale from behavioral to attitudinal and qualitative to quantitative. So just a little bit about the attitudinal versus behavioral sort of data that you can collect through these research methods. Basically just keeping your mind what users say they do versus what they actually do can be very different. And that's just something we always want to be aware of. And we want to make sure we're using research methods that will directly tell us, if we want to collect specific behavioral data or specific attitudinal data, that's going to inform our research methods. Also, we have qualitative and quantitative. So I'll just give you the example of identifying a problem versus understanding a problem. So we can use quantitative research methods to collect metrics based on users visiting some sort of web page. And we might use this data to identify pain points, where are users getting caught up. And we can tell when we see high quantity, we can think of it like, okay, this is definitely a priority. It definitely doesn't show all the problems, but it's going to show where to look, where to go asking questions. So while that quantitative metrics kind of inform the problem, when I want to understand what the problem really is, why is it happening, I turn to qualitative data, which is, we're talking user testimonials, talking to users, empathizing with users, trying to better understand their perspective. And that's a really, really important part. But the case studies we'll talk about today are going to involve interviews, which mostly collect sort of attitudinal and qualitative data, and sort of a mixture between field testing, usability testing. You'll understand what I mean when we get to it. But yeah, just right before I get into my case studies here, I'll just say that just a little backstory. Being in FTC, STC really influenced my thesis in a positive way. So when I first started undergraduate research, I was an anthropology major. I knew I wanted to specialize in qualitative research, especially in the context of technology. So I was able to wiggle my way into a research department focusing on human-computer interaction. And I used my qualitative research experience to help with the interview study, which was very foundational for me and really developed my research skills. I joined FTC somewhere around this time. And I really I started to realize, like, digital interfaces, paper, any sort of design, anything that relates to human-centered design is really, really important. And I saw technical communication as a sort of next step for me. And while attending the STC Summit in Chicago, I was able to go to some workshops that reviewed usability testing for a university website. And I apologize, I can't name the presentation or the presenters, but it really kind of solidified what I wanted to do with my thesis, which we'll see when we get to that. So just starting off, my first publication is called Duty to Respond: The Challenges Social Service Providers Face when Charged with Keeping Youth Safe Online. So I was a co-author on this paper, and I mostly focused on data collection, participant recruitment, and data analysis. Really lucky to be able to participate in this project, and I couldn't have done it without my my mentor, Pamela Wisniewski, which she's no longer at UCF. She is now at Vanderbilt University. So huge shout out to her. But we started with these research questions, which I'll just go over very briefly. So in the problem space we're kind of working in was online risks for adolescents. The entire lab that I was in focused heavily in this area. But from the gap we identified, we wanted to better understand what sort of online risks do social service providers of underprivileged youth find most concerning in terms of the outcomes they're trying to achieve for their youth. Research question 2, what are the current ways in which youth social service providers become aware of such online risks? And number 3, according to the social service providers, what would be the advantages, disadvantages of an automated risk detection system that would notify providers of online safety risks that they encountered? So when we were talking back about research methods, this research here falls into a qualitative interview study. We're really focusing on attitudinal data because we don't really have a product to see the behavior. We're learning about behaviors that other people see, but it comes in as qualitative research. So to answer these research questions, we interviewed about 37 social service providers across the US that specialize in various different fields. They may have been a school teacher working specifically with underprivileged youth, juvenile probation officer, therapists, just anybody you can really think of in that area, foster parents, foster youth. So we interviewed them to better understand what they're kind of encountering firsthand, what sort of stories they can tell us based on this sort of phenomena that they observed, which is basically the internet is a dangerous place for kids. There's a lot of horrible things on the internet that people should never see, and kids get sucked into that. So we, excuse me. What we found is mostly that they encountered a wide range of risks, but a predominant amount of the risks that they identify were sexual in nature. So being sexually solicited by adults, cyberbullying in relation to sexual risk, sexting, the list goes on. A lot of bad stuff. But then we went on to better understand the sort of ways that these providers go about discovering it. What are they doing to try to fix it? How is it influencing their job as a whole, their key performance metrics? And what we found that depending on the sort of industry that the provider worked in, whether it was the justice system, education, therapy, they all had slightly different goals. They had different ways that they went about discovering these sort of online risks and how it seeps into the real world and leads to real risks among the youth. So, for instance, we interviewed a juvenile probation officer for youth, and we found that this particular user would make fake social media profiles to better monitor the youth that they were taking care of at the time. We found that other providers only heard about online risk situations among the youth they cared for when it was brought up by the youth. And we had some providers that would learn based on just collateral damage, kids coming up and sharing their stories. So basically, we wanted to ask about the sort of automated risk detection system to better understand their perceptions around, what can we do to help social service providers become aware? And the results are very mixed, right? Because you have social service providers saying that, yeah, that would help a lot. I'd be able to have a much more thorough sort of plan to help the youth and whatnot. And detecting it early would help with efficiency. But then we also have comments of, we're already understaffed in this line of work. What are we going to do when we have an automated risk detection system identifying all these different risks, which we know are occurring? There's just not enough people to address these problems. And then we also have participants referring to issues of liability, issues of privacy, autonomy amongst the youth. So this study really, it really helped us answer these questions and developed our thinking around online risks for social service providers. And this research ended here, but typically when you're doing some sort of generative research, when you're trying to better understand the problem space, the user experience in that area, typically this would continue to ideation, develop some sort of product that would in turn help those social service providers better do their job. All right. And moving on to my thesis. So this was the project I started after that last paper. We call it a user study comparing SafeLink to an existing mHealth application for suicide safety planning. So this project is really special to me. It took a lot of work and it made my last semester of college so hectic, but I'm so glad I did it and I wouldn't change it for the world. But just getting into it, this research focused on trying to do some sort of evaluative research on an existing or two existing digital products. This is unlike the generative research, because in this we are trying to better understand interactions with a form of technology. So just a quick intro into the problem space. This research also has to do with sort of underprivileged at-risk youth, predominantly focusing on youth suicide prevention. So there are existing measures in place to sort of try to help a victim with their suicide ideation or their suicide attempt. They'd be given a suicide safety plan, which is basically a manual, a customized manual of trigger warnings, coping mechanisms, contacts, resources, people to reach out to, which is often administered after that kind of thing happens. But there's just some problems that have to do with these sort of manuals. One, they're paper, they can get lost easily. Two, they're printed out, they can't be easily changed, reformatted, they can't be easily accessed because they're paper. So the whole idea of my lab was to let's develop an app that sort of streamlines this process for mental health therapists and for those experiencing this situation. So before I was even part of the lab, they developed this app based on some generative user research conducted with therapists who specialize in youth and some youth that had experienced something similar. They developed this app. They use sort of wireframes, we call high fidelity prototypes. So when we're talking about high fidelity prototypes, a low fidelity prototype would just be your user interface written on a piece of paper. A high fidelity prototype is something you'd create in something like Photoshop or Figma to give a general idea of what your final product will look like, what are the features that it will offer. So we use this high fidelity prototype to better understand how those users would interact. And we took that information and developed it to an app. So just a little bit more background. Suicide safety planning apps have been created. They are available on the app stores, but from our research, we found that they are often not regularly updated, just not very high quality. Some offer safety plans, some don't. They all offer a lot of resources, which is a great thing. But we also found an overall lack of any sort of suicide safety planning application that could be somewhat geared towards those youth victims that have experienced suicide ideation or attempt. So we found an application and we wanted to sort of get a baseline analysis. So we've developed this app called SafeLink. It contains all the features and functions that were planned by from generative research with experts, with people who have experienced the problem firsthand. And we have this second application, which was found off the app stores, called Suicide Safety Plan. So we wanted to conduct a usability study, so a task-based user interview where we would collect user perceptions, user behaviors on these two specific applications while completing the same set of tasks. So create a safety plan, edit a safety plan, add helpful resources, things like that. So I conducted these user interviews with 10 college students aged 18 to 21 who had experienced mental health problems in the past, but are are not under the care of a clinician for suicide ideation or a recent suicide attempt. And when you do this sort of research, it's important to have your persona well thought out. Like we discussed a little bit earlier, personas are very important because you want to get an idea of what your user might be like when you don't have any users, right? Because your product isn't released into the app store or wherever. So with my research, I was an undergrad. It would just be too risky for me to get a more accurate persona for my research, which is a limitation that comes into play. But just moving on, I conducted each session lasted about an hour and a half. I conducted an orientation with users, told them what a usability study, encouraged them to do something called the Think Aloud protocol. So when you're doing any sort of task-based research, having users test a product for you, it's important to encourage them to be open, to basically speak out according to whatever they're thinking, whatever they're doing with the interface. And during this evaluation, we also record what they're doing on the screen. So I don't have the equipment here with me, but it's basically like a little overhang where you can see their interactions. So we had the task-based interview. We followed up with a short qualitative interview, and we did this with all 10 participants. And honestly, this was the first time I'd ever conducted a sort of usability test. And I keep referring it to a user study because based on the metrics we collected, it wasn't technically a usability study, because with a usability study, we would have collected more quantitative metrics. So like time to complete a task, time spent on a screen, stuff like that. But we wanted to get more at attitudes. What did these participants think about the whole aspect of using these applications? So from our findings, we found that these young adults use a lot of different coping mechanisms to try to help with their mental health. Most of the participants had seen a therapist. 8 of the 10 participants had seen a therapist. About half of the participants have actually, tried to download apps to help them with their mental health, to sort of encourage coping strategies and stuff like that relates to sort of getting into the safety planning area. So that was really encouraging, right? I was able to draw a theme from it, like these young adults who have experienced mental health issues in the past are going out of their way. They are trying to do something, particularly with digital technology. They're looking for something to manage their mental health. And when we get to research question 2, this is like the biggest research question just because it covered both the apps, right? So there's a lot that goes into it, but I'll just try to cover the main points. So perceptions towards our suicide safety planning application versus the commercially available safety planning application. So overall, participants preferred SafeLink, the application we developed, over the commercially available alternative. And when I say that, that's not really the point of a usability study, right? Or a comparative usability study like I've conducted here. The point is really, like I said, it's not to just say which one's better, right? It's to try to identify the specific situations, the contextual, the context of the participant. So how does their past influence how they interpret this app? How does their experience influence how they use this app? So when I say that, a key feature of using the SafeLink application, the application we developed, was to complete a daily check-in where you list your sort of anything that was triggering them, anything that could be used as a coping strategy, whether their coping strategy worked, and whatnot. And they had the option to share that with their therapist and their parent. And because this application was developed for younger audiences, it was decided to include the feature of back and forth communication with a parent through the application. But through my research, my participants, almost all my participants, did not want to share any sort of mental health information with their parents. Some cited that their parents were the root cause of their distress, and they'd never want to share that sort of information with their parent. Some cited that they didn't want to worry their parent. Some cited that their parents, that they just would dismiss how they feel. And that was definitely a crucial finding. And it gets way more specific, but we just don't have time to go through it today. But this was a very key finding for me, to show that, okay, this very important feature that we have that sort of is the point of our application. We want to be able to better inform support persons to help the individual. There's a key problem there, and so we definitely wanted to address that. But getting into RQ3, what suggestions did the participants offer to the solutions? So not all participants offered solutions. They identified problems that they found, but they didn't always offer solutions. Some did, and referring to the problem that I just mentioned with the parent-youth communication, some participants felt that their main support person should be a friend, should be somebody that they trust, somebody that they're comfortable sharing that sort of information. And a lot of them felt that their therapist was that, but they wanted to include other people, like their friends. Participants specifically suggested that communication channels, when you're adding support persons through the applications, those communication channels should be, linked to Discord, linked to Instagram, linked to Facebook Messenger. And I even had one participant state that their main support person is somebody they'd never even met in real life, and that they've used Discord to talk to this person for years. So it's very interesting. There was a lot of information that I gained through this study, but I just did not have the time to analyze it all. A lot of my data came out as attitudinal sort of perception, rather than getting down to the nitty-gritty with basically the user interface. So any sort of problems with the content that was on the application. I got a lot of responses to the content on the applications, the placement of buttons, any sort of confusion that they found. And it was super interesting, just didn't have time to get into it. But it really opened my eyes to the sort of problems that we can find when we show our designs to the users they're intended for, right? Because once again, we're not our users. We really have to go out of our way to try to observe user behavior and try not to influence it, right? So that's about it. I know I kind of rambled on, but yeah, I'm open to any sort of questions you have about my research or my background, my education, FTC, STC, anything like that.